Alrighty, how's it going, everybody? I wanted to do another video. Thanks for watching. And of course, I always do the protocols for those who are new to the channel. Thanks for tuning in and subscribing. I really do appreciate the support. And with that being said, of course, we know to hit the bell if you want to know when I'm going to post another video. Definitely write some comments and definitely the thumbs up. It all helps the channel grow. I'm really glad that people like the content. So with that being said, you know, there's just you'll probably, like most of us, because I do it too, like a lot of times when you're not watching like my channel or a channel, because I guarantee most of the people that are subscribed to my channel are also subscribed to other channels. And sometimes I make videos, they maybe sound like rants or whatever, and it's probably on some of the videos that you've probably seen according to if you're subscribed to these other people's channel. So that's going to be natural. So some people already know what I'm talking about or whatever. Other people have not seen those channels or while I'm making rant videos. But what I'm talking about today is generally, I gotta get my cameras, because these, if you don't know, these are the cameras that I use when I'm not using my webcam. I use these cameras right here, and I gotta go, I got rechargeable batteries now, so I gotta take them down and recharge the batteries in them so I can actually. I got two of them. I need to start using for different angles. There's two of them, but so. There is the only reason I want to make this channel, I don't want to be too long on this, is when I talk about in the box versus analog. In this day and age, I don't care if it's the home studio or a commercial studio or in between, unless you are going to record to an outside recording medium like a hard drive recorder, like a Radar. Or like I have the Alesis hard drive recorder. Or I also have Alesis ADATs, which is the tapes. Or you're recording to a tape machine. If you're not recording to some sort of tape machine, Alesis or the Tascam or whatever tape machine like that, or a hard disk recorder, you're going in the box. In the box is just another phrase for recording into your computer. It doesn't matter if it's a Mac or PC, and it doesn't matter if you're using Mac, Linux, or Windows operating system, whatever. You're using a computer and its hard drive to save all your musical stuff. A lot of times sometimes the way words can be phrased can be misleading when we say in the box. We're saying in the computer, right? So, other than that, for us old school people, which I call myself old school, is your plugins are nothing but software versions of analog rack gear, which are, we say rack because the stuff is mounted in a rack of, we call it a rack of gear, a row of gear, or column of gear, or however you want to look at it. This stuff. Plugins are just versions, or just software versions of that. That's the only difference. So the confusing part, sometimes people, they get into these wars that analog versus plugins, hardware versus software. The only difference between the two is one may sound a little different than the other. Some people swear that sometimes there are plugins that are modeled after real gear, and they put it on a piece of, they put it on whatever, bass, keyboards, guitar, vocals, whatever. And they swear that the plugin sounds just like the hardware. And it's also subjective to that because everyone's listening to different listening environments to make a comparison. Including if you listen to a plugin versus a hardware on a pair of Focals, then you go to a set of ATCs or a set of Barefoot monitors, they may sound a bit different, which can change your perspective on what you're listening to. Right? So that's also when everything's finally done and you get all your songs recorded, mixed, mastered and everything else, and you're listening to whatever you're listening to, whether it's on your phone, a set of earbuds, in your car, on a house stereo system, or whatever, your computer's speakers, whatever you're listening, they're going to sound different. And you're going to notice things differently based on what you're listening to, there really needs to be a video I need to do on listening. What you're listening to can affect your judgment and opinions and decision making. That's just pure fact. So, and including the acoustics of the room or the environment, whether it's the room or even the car acoustics, can change what you're listening to. Now, to say all that to say this, like I said before, unless you're recording to a hard disk recorder, ADAT or 2-inch tape machine or whatever, other than that, you're going to record in the box. You're going to record in your computer. That's a standard, even for commercial studios. A lot of even commercial studios will have a Mac. Most of them have a Mac. Most of them chose to use Pro Tools. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using Pro Tools. It's the most popular DAW out there. And that was by psychologically designed, even though a lot of us know that there's no advantage to Pro Tools. But it's anyhow. So, secondly, most studios, so because of that, they decide they're going to use Pro Tools or their DAW, and they're going to use a Mac or a PC, and some studios use PCs. And other than that, you're recording into a digital audio workstation, and most of them buy expensive AD to DA converters because they're servicing clients. No one's not, so they need the inputs and outputs for more than anything. That really has nothing to do with how most audio interfaces or AD to DA converters / audio interfaces. Most of them are designed to have 2 to 8 channels, and if you want to slave more, you got to use ADAT system or whatever. But for the most part, most of them are designed because they figure you need nothing more than you're only doing your own personal home project stuff. So you really don't need an interface with no more than 8 inputs and outputs. And that's the reason why you'll see most interfaces have 2 to 8. They figure that's more than enough. Even though there are people that are trying to record bands, and some people have their home studios set up to record bands, and they need up to 24 or even sometimes 32 inputs and outputs. Well, a lot of times, also, some people don't have the money to afford, or to get these interfaces with all these preamps or whatever the case. Some people do. It just depends on people's budget. Everyone's has a different budget. Now, if you were trying to create a recording studio where you are wanting to record a band, believe it or not, your most ideal, if you have the space, would be an actual console. Because not only does it come with the preamps, it comes with plenty of signal inputs and output and routing, including allow you to insert compressors and have auxiliaries to insert effects. You can also use the same board to mix on. A mixing console is ideal for multi-tracking, especially one like this, even though this is considered a live board, but it's also a recording board. Live recording boards versus just a live board. And that needs to be a video on that, on live mixers versus live / recording boards, because this is a live / recording board because it has direct outs on every single channel. What I like about this console also, it has every channel has a preamp, every channel has a phase reversal, every channel has a 48 phantom volt input source, every channel is its own. This is what they call semi-module versus some of the lower price boards have a circuit board. This one has actual circuit boards per channel. But that's a different video as well. Plus the sound of the electronics and the op amps and so forth. But that's once again different channel, different video. So what I'm trying to get across with making this video is this: once we realize we get to this analog versus in-a-box, but really in the end, if you're using a DAW and an interface, you're in the box. You're basically hybrid. How much hybrid? The only other difference between that is, do you want to do most of your stuff in your computer? Do you want to use most of just the plugins for the most part and do everything, and including use the software's internal digital mixer software in the program? Or do you want to route it out and send it through a console and use outboard gear, where you're going to implement more outboard gear and run it through a console and listen and mix and do everything that way? That's the only difference. Some people, and there are some people that don't necessarily get the console. They just get little summing mixers, and they do that. They'll come out of the computer to go through that mixer to use some outboard gear and sum everything together to record a final master, 2-track master, or whatever the case. So I'm saying all this because you have to look at it the old way, where we didn't have all these. There was none of these discussions and debates about what to use and how to do it and all that back 30, 40 years ago, because computers were non-existent in recording studios back then. The only computer was the computer that was controlling the automation for the console, the program for the like an SSL or whatever, or whatever the automation like on Neve flying faders or whatever. They had computers to control that. If your console could do automation and all that, it had a computer just to control those motorized faders, so the faders are moving by themselves, based on, and also the recall, where you can look at there and you can turn certain knobs and certain lights light up. Say, okay, I got this knob in the right position. I recalled that particular position based on the song. Every song you can lock in and program it, so when you go back to that song, it'll tell you how to reset the board. That's about as. But that kind of computer was probably, your smartphone has way more capability and technology than the computers back in the 80s. And just think about this. This is the crazy thing. The computers were so much more advanced than the computers in the 60s that got the astronauts to the moon. The computer software, you think about every year, computers advanced in technology and capability. So imagine going 50, 60 years to computers then. They were so slow and basic. And I think it's funny because I still got a box here that has floppy disk. Most of the people don't even use or know it, especially young people. They were like, floppy disk? Yeah, you had these floppy disks. These floppy disks actually still have software programs on it that you had to load. But now you can't even find a computer today with a floppy disk, yet alone the bigger, floppy disk, yet alone some computers don't even come with CD-ROMs anymore. It's funny because in my day and age, I never thought that these floppy disks would ever go out of, it's funny. But that's also for my PC that's an older PC right here that still have a floppy disk. So, and like I said, people that watch my channel, I don't necessarily make these videos directed at my audience per se. I make my videos because there are people that have YouTube channels out there that put out information, and it can be so misleading. And they may be thinking they're helping people with their biased opinions as well. And I can be somewhat guilty of that too. We all tend to have somewhat biased opinions on the way we want to do this. It's proof in the way we build and set up our recording studios. When we set up our recording studios, we have a biased way we want to do it. We have a vision that in our mind, this is what I'm going for. And sometimes we tend to think I'm going for this particular way I want to set my recording studio, so the way I want to do it must be the right way to do it, when actually it's just one way to do it. But if you ever do studio tours, you'll look at East West as an example, and you go to Ocean Way, and then you go over to Conway, then you go to Larrabee, and then you go to Sunset Sound, and then you go over to the Record Plant, and then you go to Electric Lady, you know, the Hit Factory, Patchwork, and just goes on and on and on. You'll notice no one's recording studio is identical, even down to studio monitors. You'll go one recording studio and they'll have an API legacy console. They got a set of Yamaha NS10s, maybe some Genelec 1031 studio monitors. You'll go to another studio, they have an SSL. And even with those name of consoles, you go to one studio, they have an MCI. Another studio will have a Helios. Another studio will have a Harrison. Or another studio would have a, you know, it could have an Audient. It just, and on top of that, different models of it. Some studios would have consoles that, other than the most common ones we heard of. So you'll go in there and somebody have a studio with a Tascam M700 in it. Like, Tascam? Yes, Tascam made consoles. So, and you'll go in there and not everyone is using Barefoots or Folkhouse. There's some studios that have JBL. Some studios have Westlake. Some studios have Ocean Way speakers in, you know, in the walls or whatever. And not everyone's recording studio has the same type of control room setup or live room. Even the way the live rooms are shaped can be different from control room to control room. It's like if you go to Blackbird's live rooms and then you go next door to Treasure Isle's live rooms, they're not even the same design. And you go, you know, Blackbird has API and SSL and Neve consoles, but you go next door to Treasure Isle, he's got a Trident in his. So it's nothing's ubiquitous. So to sum up the video and what I was saying about in the box and coming out of the box, it's just your, you know, and I've talked about this before, in the box versus analog and all that. There are people out there, and what's funny, here's one last thing I noticed about when I see this. You know, you know what I've noticed about most of the people trying to push you. If you watch videos where they're telling you, no, you have to have the Universal Audio 1176, or you must have this piece of gear, or this piece of gear, or this piece of gear is junk, or whatever. Most of these people are people with recording studios that are pretty much no more than what you're trying to set up in your home. Most of these people are home recording studio people. Now, here's what's funny. There are some studios, Latitude South as an example. They're in Franklin, Tennessee. He has 3 consoles in his control room. He has an API, a Neve, and an SSL. But he has believe it or not, he has a lot of warm audio gear, and he likes a lot of the warm audio mics. He's not pushing to tell you that you have to have a Telefunken or a Neumann or an AKG, C414 or whatever, or expensive mics. He's got the same thing. If you go and watch their videos, I think Andrew Masters did a video, he did a studio tour with Treasure Isle Recording Studio. And Treasure Isle had a lot of high-end clients, mostly country and western items because they're in Nashville. But he had a lot of high-end clients, Grammy Award-winning clients. And his name was Joe Correll, and he runs that recording studio, and he's pushed a lot of warm audio gear. He loves the Warm Audio Tone Beast. The Warm Audio Tone Beast is about a $600 preamp, and it's an amazing sounding preamp. It's the reason why Warm Audio was able to launch the way they were. And he loves the Warm Audio microphones. He'll tell he's better. It's funny when you have someone who's running a legit commercial recording studio like that. And even Sylvia Massey, she's also Grammy Award-winning mixing engineer who has her own recording studio, has a Neve console. and so forth. And she has some expensive vintage mics, but she even said in a video saying, I can get 20 warm audio microphones that can do a superb job compared to my one Telefunken that every now and then it likes to take a vacation, which means every now and then it won't work. And this is a $20,000 microphone. People rave that the most expensive stuff don't break, when it does. All electronics can break. This is the reason why SSL consoles and APIs and Neve consoles and all that have to be recapped, like any other piece of electronic gear. And don't think just your console's not the only thing that needs to be recapped. A lot of your outboard gear also needs to be recapped, because capacitors are the biggest #1 failure in electronics because of the heat. They fail more than resistors, diodes, transformers, and everything else. Most of the time when you have a piece of gear that doesn't work, or an electronic piece of gear that doesn't work, most of the #1 culprit in failure in electronics is capacitors. Because most companies manufacture this stuff. It's easy to mass produce a lot of product with cheaper components like electric lytical capacitors compared to film or ceramic capacitors. It's more expensive, and you think, and I'll say, for example, electric lytical capacitor might average 2 to 3 cents per capacitor. But if you add the amount of those electric lytical capacitors on one circuit board, now we're talking 30 or 40 capacitors times 3. You do the math. At 3 cents, at 40, you do the math. Now we just shot up into $1.20 or whatever the case. And that's for one circuit board. Now you say $1.20 for that circuit board. That ain't too bad, right? For those capacitors, $1.20, that's not too bad. Now do that by times 1,000,000. Now we're up a couple $2.5 million in capacitors because we're producing over 1,000,000 circuit boards. You gotta think how this whole, it's like when they make a piece of product, they're not designed to make one because they're looking at just you. And I'm not being condescending or trying to be. I'm just throwing that out there as an example. I'm not necessarily telling people you as in like you thought you were entitled to a person gear. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this: you have to think about it in that manner when it comes to this product and why some pieces of gear are more expensive or whatever. Most of the time it's because the more expensive the more of the electronics, the build quality and everything else. But at the same time, it's still it's about mass produced. How much can I make? Can I bring the cost down? Most of the time, if they can mass produce a lot more, they can get a more cost savings. It's cheaper to build 100 than it is 1. Believe it or not, so that sounds backwards. Believe me, this is how companies work. And it's also cheaper for companies to build. And sometimes they compromise on certain things, and it's not just always studio gear. You'll see it in everything: cars, homes, TVs, car radios, speakers, hair dryers, clippers, furniture, refrigerator, stove. It's just a list of thousands and thousands of things that are made. They have to, for them to mass produce that, they will start compromising here and there. This is why I'm always adamant about, if you can modify your gear and be able to get some of this gear at a cheaper price point. In other words, believe it or not, I'll say this again. You can buy a MXL Marshall microphone, microphone, modify it. Go to microphoneparts.com and buy, let's say you bought that Marshall a couple $100. You go to microphoneparts.com, buy an upgrade kit for $300 to $400. That's what's really separating a lot of the Neumann and Telefunken and Bronner and all different types of thousands of $1,000 microphones between $200 microphones, because those already come with better electronics. Now, some will argue, well, they also come with better housing. That microphone's got better material, better housing and all that. But believe it or not, most of your sound is not coming from the housing. And if you really take care of your stuff, the housing, unless it's just completely a bad build quality build microphone or whatever, most of the time if you open up the microphone, I take the electronics, that's what's making the sound of the microphone. So it's okay, well, this is an okay capsule, but I'd rather get the R47 capsule. I'm gonna get these higher quality capacitors, better diodes, these better resistors, these better output transformer, better tube components. I'm gonna upgrade the tube in it. I'm going to all this stuff to make the microphone sound a lot better. Then you'll start to say, okay, now you can't really, people that because they're gonna see the housing. Oh, that's an MXL. That's a cheap microphone. You know, oh, you got a V67 MXL. Not realizing you put higher quality components in it. Like, well, man, that's a V67, but it sounds really good. Yeah, because you upgraded and made it on the same level, whereas now it's like a TML 102 or whatever. That's what it takes sometimes. That's why I say this all the time when people get caught up on the visuals of your gear or whatever. Oh, that's Behringer. Yeah, but you don't know, I probably put Jensen transformers in my, you know, and I probably Telefunken tubes and Jensen transformers and Bird Brown op amps inside that Behringer. You don't know that. And I prove it, people that have heard mine, a lot of times when I make the music and they hear, they're like, man, the tracks sound really good. They don't understand. Some of that stuff is modified. But in the recording industry, they modify their gear. They'll take you'll see an SSL 4000 and they'll go there and they're like, yeah, the SSL came, you know, because it was an SSL, they just see SSL. They're not realizing majority of people in the industry don't even like the SSL preamps. That's why they have a rack of Neve and API preamps, because they Neve and API preamps in most cases sound better than the onboard preamps in the console. And we're talking $100,000 SSL. But they do it all the time. Because I rather like these Cappy preamps over the SSLs. And I'm not knocking SSL preamps, because some SSL preamps sound really good. But that's what they do. It's like, oh man, I'm going to take this channel script, and you have there's engineers that there are not just engineers, but there are electronic techs that will take the board apart, even SSLs or even Neves, and they'll improve components. Yeah, this is a Neve VR88, but it's got these Indonesian made electric little capacitors. We're gonna take those out and put the Philips film ceramic capacitors, whatever, titanium ceramic capacitors in it, because they can stand the heat, because this console is gonna stay on 24 hours a day. They're not gonna break down, because they can't afford to have a console like me. The reason why the stuff gear works, because I turn the gear off all the time. But those commercial studios, the gear is always on, because they're always running sessions. They never turn the gear off. So that breaks the electronics down. This is, you know, so this is all the kind of stuff that's not talked about, including down to the wiring of how a studio's wired. And they're not buying Mojave cables, and like, these guys are having handmade, high quality wiring, handmade. When the studio's built, it takes 6 months to a year to a couple of years to really build the walls and acoustics and the wire and get everything wired with high quality wire. A lot of that stuff is soldered, especially at patch bays. They're using Switchcraft or Nutrix Phantom TT, or we call Bantam, you know, TT type high quality patch bays. So they don't have, and they have a really, really high end ground system to have no noise. There's so much stuff done in that recording studio that a lot of people don't even think they need to do for their home. But you know, a lot of times, sometimes people are at home, why am I getting buzzes? And you're getting all these ground loops and noise problems, because you're not investing in ground, how to properly ground and isolate your ground issues. That's a lot of stuff in the recording studio. But to finalize the video, because it is going on 30 minutes. So with that being said, Out of that, other than being in the box, because you're going to record, if you're anything at minimum, you're going to track in your computer or track in your box. You have to. That's your recording source. Your DAW is just your software controlling your recording. It's your editing software. Now, whether you choose to mix through the console or not, but believe it or not, you may not admit it just because you don't launch the mixing window or whatever, but you're still going through your mixing window. So your mixing window has your input and output controls, how you want to route your signal out of your DAW through your interface. Because you have to tell your interface, the DAW has to be told what to do, including what DAW are you using, what MIDI controllers are you using. Once you get all that set up in your preference window, and that's where most DAWs are designed. You have to go through your preference window because it gives you preference on what everything's being controlled. Once you do that, you set your input and outputs through your DAW. Most of the time, you go to your and do I want to route just through the master main bus output, or do I want to go send every single channel through buses and then outputs, or do I want to just send it directly out of outputs of my interface? And the software lets you do that. And then once that allows you to route the signal out where you want it to go in case you want to go to a console. You got to tell the DAW to send the signal out of the console. So if you got stuff channels 1 through 48, you want all 1 through 48 to come out of each individual channel out of the interface. If you have an interface that has that many outputs, then you send it to the input of your console, and then you'll hear it through your console. But you have to set that stuff up. So that being said, now whether you choose to use outboard gear or plugins, it's just choice. And do you like it? And if you're doing it for clients, do they like it? Some clients may like the way a plugin sound on their voice versus a real piece of gear, and vice versa. Some people don't like any of the plugins that you got on there, on whatever, and they might I like the way that stuff is coming through an actual reverb unit. It's just choice of what people like. So that's gonna do it for this video, and this is gonna be my video basically summarizing the whole recording process. Now, like I said, I'm gonna go take my cameras, go put them on there so I can talk about setting up your DAW. And there's really only a few things that you need to do. Make sure that you're setting up your channels, your auxiliaries, your buses, and your master bus. And you should be able to get great results without fail if you're doing this. And there's a way you do it. You want to mimic how you would set up a console in your DAW. How do you set up your channels in your DAW for it to react like a real console, so you can get the results, so you can hear, if you're panning stuff left and right, you can actually hear it panning right through the speakers. If you're not doing that, then something's not set up right. Most of the time, I've seen so many people where they have all their tracks, and then they'll have all their plugins on these tracks. I've seen where I'm not talking about the waveforms. They'll have that screen up where I have all the way track 1 has drums, maybe 1 through 12 or whatever, all their drums, and they can even color code them. Let's say all the drums are red. And then they'll have blue for basses, and then they'll have greens for guitars and violets for vocals and all that. And they'll have everything color coded. And they're working in that window, and I'm like, okay, unless you're editing to edit those tracks, you're trying to fix imperfections in the tracks. But if let's say they're mixing, and I'm like, where's your console window at? That's what the console's designed to do in the DAW, to work like a real console. And even when they have the console window up, a lot of them won't have auxiliaries, they won't have buses, and they won't have the master set up. And it's like, and I'm thinking like, you want that to react like a real console so you get those results. You should be doing that. But I've seen people putting reverbs on a track, on a channel, when they should be putting that reverb on an auxiliary. What makes vocals sound wide and spatial in a mix is the vocals on that channel are blended with a separate channel. We call it an auxiliary channel. They're blending together to get this wider sounding effect, especially if the auxiliary is in stereo. You got two auxiliary channels. Like me on this console, all my reverb, which is on those channels far down there, are left and right, pan left and right, so I can get space to get, so I can hear the spatial wideness in the speakers. You can do that in your DAW on your mixer. You have to set it up to do that. And you're like, oh wow, those vocals, no, that's how the vocals sound wide. Yes. You don't want to put reverb on the channel, because all you're going to do is just muddy the channel up with reverb, especially if you don't know how to set the pre-delay, the decay, the diffusion, the room size, and everything else. Especially on the type of reverb unit, because reverbs are designed to emulate space. Delays are designed to get an effect of the time you hear to the time is bouncing in the room to the time your ears hear. That's why you hear things like that. That's the delay, you know, and how it bouncing from speaker to speaker in the room. It's almost like when you go, hey, 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 hey. That's a delay. The sound's echoing, bouncing, but you have to understand the physics of room. But I'm getting way. I'm going to end the video because that's a different video. So, that's going to do it for this video. But this is really the overall perspective of recording with analog and in the box. That's what this video is going to be called. So thanks for watching. And like I said, I'm going to do my video. I'm going to set up my camera so I can talk about setting up your DAW. Okay. Thanks for watching. Y'all have a great one.